So I wanted to have a quick chat about like 2018 in review, like what did I do in 2018, what was it like, what was my feeling with my reading, and a little bit about like my 2019 goals, of which there are a few. So we'll start with 2018. I'm just going to give you like a couple top line stuff. I'm not going to go through all my stats. But I read in total 169 books, which I think is pretty damn good. Yeah, considering like I had really slow periods through this year and quite a lot of like reading slumps through this year, but I'm really happy with what I have read. My average page count was 241, so again I prefer my shorter books. I've adjusted my stars, so my average star is at 3. You guys might know that I do that at the end of each year. So I go through and like re-rank books and take stars or add stars depending on how my feelings have developed for them over a year, and I always find that really valuable. My aim with that is that 3 stars should be my like standard rating across the year, so my 5-star books for any year are like the proper standout ones for that year, because I do think my ratings like change over years, and this helps to normalise like my results a little bit. So my 5-star books are normally the ones I really love. I spent £937.34 on books this year. I know that's a lot, but that is actually really good for me. That's like £300–400 less than I'd normally spend on books, and I'm hoping I spend less on books this year as well, so I'll save that for the goals. I think that's okay. I bought 123 books, so £7.62 is my average. I mostly buy new books, and I didn't actually get sent that many books for review this year, so the majority of the books I've read this year have been ones I bought myself, so again I kind of feel pretty happy with that. I read more fiction, literary fiction and non-fiction than I did any other genre this year, which is pretty standard for me, and I read most of my books in paperback, so 73% were paperback, even though I buy a lot of new stuff. 42 of those books were hardback, so I normally will wait for paperback, even though I do love hardbacks, but just cost-wise. 97% were adult, which doesn't surprise me. I'm definitely more of an adult-centred reader, and 30% were published this year, which was higher than any of my other percentages, but they did kind of, like if it was a graph it would kind of go like that through, so I tend to read newer books over my older books. Most of the books that I read were between 200 and 300 pages, which again makes sense given that my average page count. I read books from 57 different countries, which I'm proud with. So obviously I had Around the World, and I didn't want to do that in the end, and it just didn't work for me, but I still read from a lot of countries this year, and I enjoyed the experience. I don't think Around the World is something I want to carry on in any form. My feelings have kind of changed over time on it, and I think I'm done with it, but I did like it, and I think for me reading more widely in terms of countries works better when I'm doing it in a more relaxed way. I did still have 36% of my reading come from America, but that is so much better than it has been like for years. It's normally like 50% plus. And I wanted to read a few more books from the UK, and I read 15% from the UK, so I think that worked out quite well. 30% of what I read was in translation, which again I'm pretty happy with. I think that's pretty normal, and my race, which is just simplified, is again like the same as it's been for a really long time, which is 80–20, so 80% of what I'm reading is from white authors. Now, I've always said I want to improve this, and even when I try and do things, even when I try and do quite big things like Around the World, I struggle with this, I really do. I'm a little bit unsure about how I fix this, because I think this is something that hasn't changed over time. And actually there was another category which I'll just talk about quickly now, which was gender, which hadn't changed over time, and I tried really hard to put the effort in to read differently, and it never changed. And this year, the year I stopped trying so hard to change it, it changed. So gender, I've always read 60% plus male authors, like ever since I recorded my reading. And then this year it didn't hit 40, and that wasn't because of some grand effort to read women. I just kind of went, oh, I fancy reading some women, and did, and loved it, and picked up more stuff by women. And I kind of feel like maybe that's the route I want to go down with race, is that I want it to feel like, actually no, I'm just interested in this topic and I want to read it, rather than planning it so much, because I think then I feel like obliged, or I feel bad. And if I enjoy it and I want to read more of it, surely that means I'm more likely to read more of it than if I feel I have to. So that's another one of my spoilers for 2019. Nearly half of what I read was from Europe, 43% was from Europe, and 38% from North America. That doesn't surprise me again, because Around the World kind of lasted through Europe, so I did most of Europe before I stopped doing Around the World. So that makes sense. And then obviously the UK was like 15% of my reading, so that doesn't surprise me. I only read 8 books from Africa, which I knew I had an issue with, and only 6 from South America, and I think I would have read more from South America if I wasn't doing around the world, because I really like that like place to read from. I've enjoyed a lot of books I've read from South America, but I kind of gravitate towards certain countries, and because I'd read them from around the world I didn't buy books from those countries, so again I think that could maybe change when I try less. And then yeah, just in terms of where I got my books from, so I bought 123 books and 68 of those were from online retailers, 12 were review copies, so not that many reviews really when I read like 170 books, and 25 were from chain bookshops, and there's a few that were like gifts and charity shops and stuff. Yeah, and 98% of that was adult, so again that doesn't surprise me. With my TBR, of those I read, 60% of those were from 1 year or less, and that actually was really worth recording, even the whole TBR thing. I know it was a faff for lots of people, but for me to know actually if I'm going to read my books, like the vast majority of those I read are going to be read within a year of when I bought them, and I think that's a really good thing for me to know and be aware of. And if I've had a book for longer than a year, I think I just reassess, like, do I really want to read you, and that will help me with my TBR. So those are sort of like my headline stats, my kind of like year in review. And then in terms of what I want from 2019, I really want like no goals really. Like there are some things I think would be good, but I'm really keen this year because of like the stress I had last year that actually this isn't a goal orientated year, and I actually haven't made any New Year's resolutions, which is really unusual. I normally have like 10 that I make at the beginning of the year, that some are like really achievable and some of them are stretch goals. I don't have any apart from that I need to save a certain amount of money so that I can buy my house, because I'll be moving house at some stage this year, and I don't want to have any reading goals. So there's some stuff I'd like to do, but there's nothing I'm setting for myself as like a goal. Like I'd like to read more women again this year because I really enjoyed that last year. I'd like to take the pressure off reading from certain countries or just reading one book from certain countries and just read what's interesting. I'd like to have a lower TBR across the year so that I can mood read more and follow lines of interest. I think that's when I enjoy my reading the most, when I read a book and I go, oh my goodness, I didn't know anything about X, and then I go and find another book about that and that may open another line of interest, and that is cut off when you have a large TBR, because you finish one and you feel a bit bad, like you should be maybe reading some of the other stack that you haven't got to yet. So those are kind of like vague goals, but they aren't, I'm not setting any big goals for this year, and that's really good. I think I can be really hard on myself with goals, and I know I can, and I think that's what made this year hard, and this whole year has been hard, like in a weird way, like in terms of reading, and it wasn't enjoyable and I don't want to do it again, and that's fine. I don't have to do it again, and that's lovely, and I think I'm getting much better at trying to be nicer to myself and not do things if I don't want to. So yeah, not a really like in-depth goals video. I know lots of people really like goals and setting goals, but this year is just a year of kind of what will be, with a few overall things, like maybe try and keep reading women because you like that, and maybe try and keep a smaller TBR because that's how you read your books and you enjoy them more. But it's focused on enjoyment, and focus on enjoyment rather than achievement, I think. And I think actually those two things tend to correlate with me. If I'm enjoying what I'm doing more, I end up reading more anyway. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on reading and what I've done last year. What are your goals? I do like to hear other people's goals after having said I don't really have any myself. So if you do have any reading goals or like New Year's resolutions, share them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about them, and I'll see you guys again soon in another video. Bye bye.